You've put out into the public ideas and concepts that I believe are ill-conceived or poorly written and, quite frankly, are legally impossible to implement.
I didn't put them out.
At Tuesday's Palm Coast City Council meeting, Vice Mayor Teresa Pontieri pushed back against Mayor Mike Norris's proposed austerity budget, arguing many of the recommendations were either already being implemented or weren't realistic. What follows is the full discussion uninterrupted.
Mayor, at the last meeting, you presented or you asked council if we would give consensus to entertain what you called an austerity budget. At the time of asking, none of us had seen the austerity budget, and I think all of us were kind of, and I won't speak for anybody else, but the feeling that I got from everybody was that we were all in agreement to engage in what I consider to be fiscally responsible concepts in order to address what is not only a rough budget year because of the downturn in property values and the slowing of construction, but also in anticipation of what may come out of Tallahassee. You got consensus from this council to entertain kind of a set of principles to go by. And I don't know if it was later that day or the day after, I think it was the day after, I actually received a copy of the austerity budget, and I think it was also published in its full by Flagler Live.
Let me stop for a second, Vice Mayor. That was just me and the city manager and the attorney were having a discussion, and I had been doing some research, and I sent them that as a shell document so we could try to mold it for our city, because we had this discussion yesterday too. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And I was going through and I said, oh, do you want to do up a draft resolution? And that's all I did. And I sent that to Mark and said, we need to pare it down. And I actually said that, AI doesn't know a lot of things about our community or our systems of government. So it was just giving us something to go by. All those things on there, really, we're already doing it. It's just putting it into guidance from the council, what we want to look for. None of those things, really, it's sad that Pierre would publish an email from the mayor to the city manager and the attorney. We have sunshine laws and stuff, but when we're talking and just kicking back ideas and stuff, it's just like fear-mongering, and that's not what the intent of any of that is. I have no problem with the state, if they want to take away that ad valorem and that's what the residents want, that's what the residents want. But I do have to plan, and I'm not a person that sits back on my butt and doesn't look forward and try to lean forward to get ahead of things. So really, Pierre took that whole thing out of context, and he's, out in left field, so to speak.
Well, and I can appreciate you having that opinion, but when you say something from the dais and then you forward a proposed or a shell, and I did see that you referenced it as a shell, austerity budget to our attorney that contains things in it that are in some way, shape, or form possibly going to come before the council. You've put out into the public ideas and concepts that I believe are ill-conceived or poorly written and, quite frankly, are legally impossible to implement.
I didn't put them out, Vice Mayor.
You did, though. You forwarded
an email.
I understand that, Mayor, but that's my point. You have to think about the things that you do on this dais, what you say and what you send, and I think we've all been on the receiving end of very in-depth public records requests. My point and what I wanted to bring up is not to get into a back and forth about what your intent was when you sent that, or that's not my point. My point is twofold. One, a lot of the things, and you've already said it, that are in this austerity budget are already being done by the city of Palm Coast. So when you put things out like this, that the residents aren't aware of what is already taking place, it makes the city look bad. It makes us look like we're not already engaging in a lot of things that could save us money. For instance, I won't say you, but the austerity budget shell called for the merging of financing and procurement. Well, we already have procurement merged with finance.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Mayor, please let me finish. Please let me finish. I let you talk when I wasn't done. Okay? It recommends things like 4-day work weeks when these become into 10-hour workdays rather than 5 8-hour workdays. It's still 40 hours a week. My point is that if we are going to address our budget and make some difficult decisions, it can't be based on AI. It can't be based on, general concepts that we all, in theory, agree with, but in reality are very hard to implement. Passing a balanced budget and picking the budget apart to find cost savings takes a lot of work. It takes reading documents. It takes rolling your sleeves up and spending the time to dig into the actual finances of the city. It takes an understanding of the fact that sewer, utilities, waste, all of those have their own dedicated funds. Therefore, an austerity budget from AI that says we should prioritize things in this order, when none of those things even come out of the same budget, is not helpful. And it puts out into the public an idea of things that can be done that are impossible to implement. They're not legally possible to even talk about. So my point, Mayor, is that as we move forward, we need to make sure that we are not making cuts that are, again, in theory, yeah, sure, we'll cut certain things. We did a proclamation about Parks and Rec today. Parks and Rec comes out of general fund. So those are the types of things that we're going to have to look closely at. And when you say, well, we're going to pass an austerity budget that says we have to prioritize things, we shall prioritize things in this certain way. Well, our community puts a very high value on Parks and Rec. So what are we going to do to ensure that quality of life in the Parks and Rec department that our community values is preserved? The austerity budget recommends cutting all arts programs and festivals. Well, of course it would, because AI is not a person. AI is certainly not a resident of the city of Palm Coast, and AI can't recognize the importance of some of the events that we fund every year. Grok doesn't understand how important the 511 5K is to our community. Claude can't possibly understand how important things like the Josh Cruz writing competition are. A chat bot has no idea how much value we place on things like Touch a Truck. Those are all things that an austerity budget says, yeah, just cut it, no big deal. And I know maybe you didn't read it and take out the things that we were already doing, but I think it's important for the residents to understand that the austerity budget calls for fixing roads using a worst first plus preservation policy, where we, quote, shift back to crack sealing and resurfacing versus full rebuilds. Well, Mayor, we've already been doing that. 3.5 years ago, I recommended we start doing that. We've been setting $1 million aside every year to do just that. And you know what? It didn't take IA to tell us we needed to do that. So again, I think it's really important that we make sure we are properly communicating things that we are already doing in our community that are saving the taxpayers money, and rolling up our sleeves and taking a look at what we can do in reality to save more money, to come up with better efficiencies, and to tighten our budget. The last thing I'll say, Mayor, is, when we are communicating what we are doing with what we are going to do with the budget, we need to be very clear about certain things that we can do with certain funding sources, and the importance of, if we are going to trim and cut and do some of the things that I know all of us want to do, that we are looking very hard at the general fund budget and how other funding mechanisms can free up general fund monies. Because if Tallahassee does make a change and the amount of tax dollars that we're going to get are reduced, that comes only from the general fund. So we have to focus very carefully on how we are going to, general fund monies are largely fungible. So how are we going to make up for those dollars in the general fund? That should be the focus. And I hope that council is willing to do the hard work to come up with realistic changes to our budget that can impact our community in a positive way.
The debate comes as Palm Coast officials search for ways to reduce spending while preparing for possible state-led property tax reforms. For the Palm Coast Observer, I'm Rich Carroll.